Our speaker today is Mr. Will Forbes. He joined our technology department in July after spending a number of years working for the ESF campus as their technology director. He grew up in Saranac Lake, New York, and went to St. George's School for high school. However, I knew he was a great hire when a few weeks after he'd been here, he brought me this, which is a gold charm football and a gold baseball charm that had belonged to his grandfather as Interact champions, and his grandfather had attended Episcopal Academy, and it turns out that he has quite a line of Episcopal Academy connections. He graduated with a BS in biology from Lafayette College, got his MS teaching degree from SUNY Potsdam. He previously taught science, math, and computer science at Princeton Charter School in Princeton, New Jersey, and coached a number of different sports. What brings him here today is an interesting story. After the Veterans Day service that you'll remember from November, Mrs. Keith, our librarian, approached him and asked him to come to the library. In the glass case there were a couple of things that were posted about his great uncle who had served during World War II. And we're going to hear about that great uncle today. Please stand to greet Mr. Forbes and allow him to tell you that story.
Good morning. Please be seated. So bear with me, I'm going to read from this because I had to write it down because I'd probably wander speaking like I'm doing now. But almost 100 years ago, in 1913, Webster's dictionary defined the word hero as a man of distinguished valor, enterprise in danger, or fortitude in suffering. It is my great honor to be here this morning to tell you a story of a hero, to recount his struggles in the face of incredible adversity and his faith and courage to overcome them. This is not intended to be a history lesson. Now, I can see some of you getting starry-eyed, thinking of your favorite character in your favorite book and their personal battles to survive the day to tell the tale. You're in luck because that is precisely the kind of story I'm about to tell you. So here it goes. A long time ago in a galaxy far, oh, wait, no, it's not the right story. Oh, okay, all right. Wait a second. Here we go. It all begins way back in the year 1918 in the sleepy town of Villanova, Pennsylvania. A baby was born in a house that was 3 doors down from the trolley station across from Villanova College. That's right, college. This house was where those big parking lots are now and was directly across Lancaster Ave from what you now know as Villanova University. He's the second-born son of Colonel William Innes Forbes and Daisy Cox Wright Forbes. And his name is Francis Cox Forbes, and he is my great-uncle. I've always known him as Uncle Frank. Now, it turns out that Uncle Frank is one of you. He attended Episcopal Academy from 1927 to 1933, went on to St. George's in Newport for his 3rd through 6th form years, and graduated from the University of Pennsylvania after he had, quote, kept his grades up to scratch in January of 1941. Now, at this time, the United States was not officially at war, but all of Europe was, and all indicators were pointing to the U.S. entering the war at some point in the near future. December 7th of that year, the U.S. was attacked by the Empire of Japan at Pearl Harbor, and shortly thereafter, the U.S. officially entered the Second World War. Uncle Frank joined the military in January of 1942. He was fascinated with flying, so he joined the U.S. Army Air Corps. It's a predecessor to the U.S. Air Force. He went to a number of bases in Florida and Alabama to learn how to be a fighter pilot. He graduated from flight school in September of 1942 and went on to Sarasota, Florida to fly Air Cobras until December. Excuse me. After receiving his pilot rating in the P-40E Kitty Hawk, he got his orders transferring him to the newly designated 14th Air Force. Major General Claire Chenault was the commanding officer of this unit. Some of you may have heard of this unit before. They were known as Flying Tigers. He arrived at his unit's base of operations in Yunnan, China in the beginning of September of 43. That's okay, I didn't know where it was either, so what does everybody do these days? They Google it. So it turns out that this spot is on a map, is about 140 miles northwest of Kunming in southwestern China. It is literally halfway around the world. Here's an excerpt of an earlier interview with Uncle Frank. It was October and the rice paddies were ripe for harvesting, and the Japanese wanted the rice to feed their troops and were trying to stop them, and we were there to try to stop them. They wanted the rice. They didn't want the land or anything like that. They wanted the rice, and we tried to stop them, but we couldn't. It was in southwestern China around the Salween River, and that was the sort of dividing line between the Japanese Imperial Army and the Chinese nationalists. One of the efforts was to dive bomb the troop concentrations trying to take the rice harvests, and that's when they shot 2 of us down. We had taken off from Yunyanyi at 11 a.m. on the morning of October 17th. Our target was Liu Q. I was the last plane of 4 in a line to make strafing runs and drop bombs on enemy units. As we commenced our run, I had dropped all of my bombs, then blam, they had got me. Another guy ahead of me, he got hit too, but he just disappeared. I don't know what happened to him, a fellow named Jackson. The other 2 planes between us made it through without getting hit. The other 2 pilots saw me go in, so they circled around and saw my parachute on the ground. They circled around again, and my parachute was gone. When they made it back to base, they reported what they had seen. Now, on October 22nd, 1943, halfway around the world in Villanova, Pennsylvania, there came a Western Union telegram. They didn't have faxes, they didn't have iPhones, they didn't have, text messages. They got telegrams, and the telegrams didn't even get mailed. They had to go down to the office to pick it up. So this is this is exactly what it said, because now I have a copy of it. The Secretary of War desires me to express his regret that your son, Second Lieutenant Francis C. Forbes, has been reported missing in action since 17 October in the Asiatic area. If further details or other information are received, you will be promptly notified. The Adjutant General. So here, Uncle Frank's mother gets this, and after the days after receiving this heartbreaking news, his mother decided to honor Uncle Frank's memory by commissioning a cross to be given to the Episcopal Academy in his honor with the following inscription: In memoriam dierum, if I butchered that, I apologize. October 17 to 21, 1943, Lieutenant Francis Cox Forbes, USAAF. If you're interested in seeing this cross, it's on display every middle school chapel service. For the past 70 years, this cross, right there, has been serving the Episcopal Academy and its students by leading the clergy into chapel for their services. This in itself would be a great place to end the story, but our hero isn't finished yet. You see, even though everyone feared the worst, they came to find out about 4 weeks later, to quote Mark Twain, the report of my death was an exaggeration. Uncle Frank was shot down, but he did not pay the ultimate sacrifice. He had survived, and here is the rest of his story. The interviewer asked, what was the scariest moment of your life? Was that the scariest moment of your life? He responded, no, I really was not frightened. I was curious. I said to myself, what's going on? Is this death? No. So I had to get out of the airplane because I had been hit and was losing altitude. I had an oxygen mask on, so when I was engulfed in flames, I inhaled violently. With the oxygen mask on, this saved me from inhaling all of the flames and hot gas, which would have killed me right away. So I figured and asked myself again, was this death? No. It wasn't death, so I pulled my ripcord out of my seat and started to climb out. When I finally got out of the cockpit and jumped clear of the plane, I looked into what appeared to be pitch black and saw a patch of white light out of my right eye. And out of my left eye, I saw a man standing there next to me who was dressed in a military uniform. He had no insignia, you see, and he had a benign look on his face. That lasted about 2 seconds, and then it was gone. So then I was falling. So then the thing to do was to pull your ripcord. So I pulled my ripcord, my parachute opened. We had a graveyard joke in the unit. If your parachute doesn't open, then the Army will issue a new one for free. So anyway, it turns out that wasn't all that funny a joke. I had no idea where I was going to land, and I landed in the only place I could have landed safely without being immediately captured. I had no control over that whatsoever. It just went down that way. It was a little sandy beach on the Salween River. We had standing technical orders on survival, and they stated not to try to cross the Salween River because you will likely drown. I said to myself, this is the one exception. It was sort of a little beach area that went into the river, and I was able to get out of my harness, and I ran towards the river. See, I was going to swim it. I had ditched my sidearm because the last thing I wanted to do was get into a firefight and the weight would just drag me down. I had my clothes, my standard issue personal Bible with me, and I got into the river. One reason why I was able to survive was because in the summer of '43, there was a drought. So all those big rivers ran 6 to 10 feet lower than what was normal in the month of October. Another reason was that my plane crashed in the river upstream and completely sank except for the oxygen tank, which had shaken loose and come out of the rear of the fuselage. It came floating down the river, and I grabbed a hold of it for flotation. I had gotten into some white water, rapids and such, and if I hadn't had that, I would have drowned. So I made it to the shore downstream, but I was on the Japanese side of the river. I sort of flopped down on the bank and shook for a long time. Interviewer asked him, were you aware of the brutal tactics employed by the Japanese used when interrogating prisoners of war? Was that in any part of your consciousness or thinking at the time? Uncle Frank responded, "Yes, definitely. I knew all about it. We had a pilot we flew with that had lost his motor in his P-40, and he made it out safely and on the ground when he was captured. What happened to him, I can't talk about it now, but the stories went around the squadron for weeks." At the time we had heard about it, I told myself that was terrible, but it couldn't happen to me. It didn't bother me at all. It couldn't happen to me. And then, you see, it did. So I stayed on the banks of the river until I dried out, when I was able to get up and hop into a drainage ditch of a rice paddy. You see, all the rice was ready for harvesting, and the farmers had drained the water. So I hopped in there and stayed in the rest of the day. Interviewer asked, "You said before that you had your standard issue Bible with you." His response, I did have it with me, but I wasn't able to use my hands. But one thing about it was that I was in a valley, and I remembered my Psalms, and I repeated them to myself. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall not fear, for thou art with me." And that had an important part in my situation. It gave me the courage and the strength to keep moving. So the next day I started walking around the area looking for Chinese guerrillas because it was rumored that they had such units on this side of the river. I was on the Japanese side of the river for 4 days. I did not see any Japanese officers or soldiers until the last day, and I had come across a ravine that was too wide to jump across. So the only reason why I went up the one side was that a herd of those Filipino buffalo were coming at me in a hostile way and made me go up earlier than what I wanted to. As I got to the crest of this ravine, I looked across it to see a Japanese officer in a pointy hat with a pistol, a leather belt, and a samurai sword glaring at me. There were 2 enlisted soldiers with him that he motioned to them to come and get me. So they had started running down their side of the ravine. So I believe what saved me here was at that point I remembered how to backtrack from my beagling days at the Radnor Hunt. So I went back over my trail, down most of the ravine, and took off through the wheat fields that were tall enough to hide me. I never saw them again. I spent a very uncomfortable night by the river, so I figured it was time to get across. I got 3 of those bamboo poles that were floating as flotsam, put them together, tucked them under my arms, and kicked my way across the river. I had to get across fairly soon because there was white water downstream. After I got across, I climbed the boulders on the other side very slowly, expecting the Japanese to appear on the opposite side of the river and take shots at me, but they didn't do it. So then I got onto this path that came down to the river, and I walked up it to where there was this little house of sticks. I sat down in front of that and went to sleep. I was awakened by 2 soldiers wearing the insignia of the Nationalist Army, and I knew I was in Chinese hands at that point in time. So there was a Chinese captain there who could speak some English, and I talked to him for a while, and he had asked me if I could walk. I said no. He asked me if I could ride a horse. I said no. He asked me if I had to be carried. I said yes. And so they carried me on a litter for 3 days until Dr. Todd, a British Quaker surgeon who was in China providing medical services to peasants, met us on the trail. He had them carry me back to his village that he was staying in and patch me up as best he could there. They tried to get me to walk, but I was too weak to walk because I lost an awful lot of weight over the past couple of days. We left at first light from his village to get down to the Burma Road to meet up with U.S. forces. They were supposed to meet us there at midday, but when we got there, they weren't there. They turned up a little bit later, and we had asked them why they weren't, where they were. And they said, did they see the Zeros that had just strafed the area? We said no, but as it turns out, we had avoided being seen because we left at first light, and if they would have seen us, that would have been the end of us. Colonel King, an American Air Force flight surgeon, met us at the rendezvous point on the Burma Road in a Medical Services Corps ambulance. They packed me up and got me back to Yunnan. Then they got me on a DC-2 airplane, and we landed in Kunming. In Kunming, they had to operate on my eye because of some damage that I had sustained in the crash. This surgery enabled me to fly again. If that surgeon had not been there, I probably would have lost an eye and never been able to fly again. After a couple of days, I was moved to Assam, India for the Christmas of '43. From there, I was moved to Calcutta for about a month, and finally on to West Palm Beach, Florida, for the remainder of my convalescence leave. So in early 1944, Uncle Frank was reunited with his mother in Florida while he was recovering from the wounds received during this incredible ordeal. In 1946, his mother, my great-grandmother, passed away from complications during a surgical procedure. In her memory, our family donated yet another cross with the following inscription: "To the glory of God and loving memory of Daisy Cox Wright, Forbes, 8/19/88 to 7/17/46. If you're interested in seeing the second cross, it's on display every lower school chapel service. And for the past 68 years, this cross has been serving the Episcopal Academy and its students by leading the clergy in the chapel for services." That one. So to bring you up to present day, Francis Cox Forbes lives up the road in Paoli and has been in the area ever since retiring as a captain in the United States Army Air Forces. If you'd like to meet him, it would be my great pleasure and honor to introduce him to you. He's lovingly known to his to his kids as Dad, and to his family and friends he is known as Uncle Frank. It is my honor and privilege to present to all of you Captain Francis Cox Forbes, sitting in the front row. That was outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. Thank you for that. So, to sum up, my Uncle Frank had a number of things go his way during this epic ordeal. My advice to you is if you're ever asked to go bigling, like Uncle Frank asked me to do back in 1994, you might think about it because it might just save your life. It's these experiences of your life and faith that help you overcome adversity in ways you'd never imagine. So you will all leave here this morning, and in the years ahead, at the end of your time at Episcopal, to continue your own journeys and grow from the experiences yet to come. During those journeys, take a moment to reflect, and you'll hopefully come to realize that even though you have left our halls to pursue your dreams, these halls will never really leave you. It never left Uncle Frank. So Mrs. Keith, thank you for starting me on this path of research of this project, which has led to this amazing homecoming for myself, my family, and the Academy. So Uncle Frank, on behalf of everyone from the Episcopal Academy, past and present, welcome home, old boy. It's great to have you back. Thank you for your time.
This family has